get yourself into trouble. We can talk all we want, but remember, now it's captured forever. All right, and we got
What's your opinion of?
I think that's the questions, right?
Yeah.
So this is this joke. So when you run for office, right, you saw this as well, where you have these organizations asking you to fill out their like questionnaires, and I guess what they're doing is they're trying to lock you into a certain position so that then later on they can say, but you said this back when you were a candidate.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay, my phone is on vibrate. All right. Okay. So, why don't we just start with just having a conversation? And you're gonna hang around?
Oh, I'm not here though.
Oh, okay. I just want to make sure so that way. All right.
Two off-camera voices. It's a new format.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go do some emails.
Okay. All right. So. Oh, I set the thing. Okay. So, since you've gotten elected, what's your morning routine like? How's it changed from when you were not on the council?
I mean, I get up and I check email, which is about the same. Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, the main thing is going from practicing law, which is what I do professionally, to now being on the council. There's a whole nother inbox in my email client, and sometimes I go to that first. Sometimes I go to my work one first. But it's juggling a whole nother variety of tasks, a whole nother set of commitments and deadlines, and is this meeting happening, and did it get canceled, and all of that. So I generally do the same thing, which is I get up and turn on the computer. Usually turn on the computer first and try and get something out of the way. Yeah.
So
And
are you
then
a coffee or tea guy in the morning?
I usually don't drink coffee or tea. Coffee, if it's actually caffeinated, makes me pretty jittery.
Uh-huh.
I think I'm fairly sensitive to it. And so then I try and focus in on, analyzing an ordinance or reviewing a case or drafting something, and it'll distract me. So I don't necessarily like that. Sometimes I'll drink tea, but then I often forget about it. So in that case, usually something that is okay when you reheat it again later.
So you would say you're fairly consistent then with your routine. Small changes.
I pretty consistently make a bowl of oatmeal in the morning, and try and respond to people, and I wake up thinking about, oh shoot, I didn't respond to that email from like a week ago. Oh mate, it's 2 weeks ago. Oh no, that sort of thing. So yeah. It's a lot of balancing now. I mean, with the city council, there's people are hitting you from every direction, right? I mean, there's the issues that are just the day-to-day, checking what's the city spending money on, what are the boring ordinances or resolutions like the finance policy changes that we just put into place. And then there's the hot issues that people are concerned about, people are writing you about, people are talking about in the paper, that sort of thing. And then there's the things that you want to work on. We were just talking about the affordable housing issues, and the flip side of that being homelessness. And that's something that I want to prioritize. There's all these other things coming in day to day. So how do you prioritize the projects you really need to focus in on that are really complex and have a lot of moving parts, and at the same time you just have this daily barrage of different tasks from all different angles. I mean, the other day we had to try and understand pension systems from the 1970s, and it's like, it's before we were even born,
Yeah. Well, with that, you actually kind of led into one of the questions that I did have here for you. Maybe I should have wrote a little bigger ahead of time.
No worries.
Yeah. So, how do you balance your new role with the city council in your life as opposed to when you were just practicing law? Since you were now more involved, how do you balance all that?
Yeah, I mean, I knew when campaigning that I was hoping to get elected and planning on not having as many clients for my law practice. So knowing that I was taking on a task of between 40 and 80 hours a month with city council, and then proportionally not taking on additional clients in the year or so prior to that. So, the balance is basically how do I control what comes onto my plate as an obligation. And the key thing as an attorney is, when are you going to take that person on as a client? Because once you make that decision, you've really committed yourself. Yes, there's different ways to pull out, but it's not a good practice. And it's much better to say at the very beginning, I'm sorry, I can't take on new clients right now. So I did a lot of that in the year prior to being on council, so in 2017. And that helped with being able to then have this additional workload of the council. Right now it's just learning all these new things. I mean, we're at the beginning of the third month of having a fairly new city council in terms of 4 new people. And so it's a big learning curve. We've had a number of executive sessions to bring ourselves up to speed on some of the litigation or potential litigation that the city's involved with or might be involved with. We've had a lot of a lot of things in the last couple of months, and so it's been a good learning curve. And it always feels like, oh wait, there's another policy that we have to learn. So for example, the water efficiency plan, it's like, oh, I didn't even realize there was a water efficiency plan. I'm glad there is one, and it makes sense, but another plan to read in the evening before going to bed. Yeah.
And so going back to towards the balance, so since you've planned already to kind of take on less work, have you had any struggles or challenges from the income side? Has there been any strain? Because city council, it's not a high-paying position. So has that put any strain on you financially to be able to do this, to be able to serve the population?
Yeah. So my partner and I are pretty fortunate. We were able to buy a house in 2013, so we have a pretty low mortgage. We don't have kids. Kids are great, but there's also a cost. And we both have jobs that bring in enough income to make ends meet, but it's not spectacular. We go on road trips. We don't fly to foreign countries for vacations, that sort of thing. And so, no, it's been fine with the income load. I describe my law practice as low overhead, low revenue. I mean, I'm working mostly for people who can't afford standard rates for attorneys anyway, so I'm not billing people the rates that we often hear about attorneys billing. And fortunately, one of my main clients said, hey, we want to give you a raise in your per hour rate. So that's been great because that's allowed me to back off in hours and still be able to earn a similar income to last year. But yeah, no, it works out, but it's nothing spectacular. There's no plans to move into a bigger house. We just live in a little house in the middle of town on South Cherry, or North Cherry, I mean.
Yeah. I'm trying to illustrate the fact that council members are still people. That they still have the same struggles that everyone else does. Because I know a lot of times people, they look at a person who's in politics or holds a particular career, and they think, well, they're just doing it for the money or for ambitions. But I want to make sure that you can present yourself as a regular person, because no one around here is filthy rich or doing this just for career ambitions. I mean, everyone's got a little bit of career ambitions, but give people an idea of a normal person's life struggles and goals, but without it being over exaggerated, because a lot of people forget that when they think of politics and politicians and all that. So some of these questions will seem like they're not related to anything, but that's the whole point.
Yeah. So just a few thoughts on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, our income's pretty similar to the median household income in Port Angeles. So, I feel the same struggles that other people feel when the utility rates, go up in the winter because you're using more heat. Fortunately, the city kept it at 3% increase for this next year, so we're not going to see that. But a few years ago, we were seeing quite a change in our utility bills. And when the property tax bill comes, it's like, oh, really? Seriously? That much more? And so, yeah, I hear that. And with city council, it is paid. I would describe it more as kind of volunteer with a stipend. So city council members earn before taxes $550 a month. The checks actually end up being a little bit under $500, and although that could be variable depending on somebody's W-2. And so really what it translates into is somewhere between $6 an hour and $12 an hour, depending on how much time we're putting in. And we're paid a flat fee no matter how much time we put in. So, trying to say, hey, I'm responding to people, not because I get paid to respond to constituents, to hear people's concerns, to take the time to answer the phone when somebody calls, but because this is what I want to do. We're civil servants for the people of Port Angeles. That's our role. We're representatives. You distracted me there.
Oh, sorry, no, just checking the cameras.
Okay, we're civil servants for the people of Port Angeles. We're representatives of the people, and the city is our organization. It should be the people's organization, and we're trying to do what we can to say, okay, we're representing the interests of the people who are here, the people who live here, the people who have made this our home, and this needs to be a place that can be affordable and accessible to everybody. So it's important that we know what that means, that if people in Port Angeles cringe when they open their property tax bill, then I should be cringing too.
So can you give me everyone an idea of just how many hours roughly you put in, whether a weekly or a monthly basis, since you've started, just so people realize that the amount of funds that are given to the council, what that really looks like in terms of, like you said, $6 or $9 an hour, but in actuality, I think that's actually much less than that. Can you give me just a little breakdown of how much time you actually put?
Yeah, so
communicating, emails, council matters, outside,
I keep track of my time in a spreadsheet because as an attorney, that's how you're paid. Is the only thing you can sell is your time. And so I think January was 67 hours. December, this is before we were on the council, was maybe about 80 hours or so. I mean, I was thinking about it in terms of, okay, what are these hours that I'd be doing if I was already sworn in, because I wasn't sworn in until January 2nd. I haven't even had time to do my billing from February, so I don't know yet how many hours that was in February. So fortunately, I don't have enough data there, but I could certainly give it to you later. I did calculate for 2017, so this was campaigning. And this is important, I think, for people who are considering running for city council in 2019. There's, council member Kidd is term limited out. She's been on the council now for it'll be 12 years by the time she's done. Council member or Mayor Brooke has said that she is not going to run for a third term. And then Council member Meredith hasn't said specifically, but his seat's also up for election. So there's probably 2 open seats, possibly 3 open seats. And that's 2019. It's around the corner, really, when you're talking about election time. So in thinking about that, if people are looking at running, I looked at how much time did I spend during that year. I spent about 100 hours on things that I would consider the things that you do anyway as a council member. Attending the council meetings, attending work sessions, going to other meetings, meeting with various people, trying to figure out who's who in the city and that sort of thing. So that was about 100 hours. And then I spent about 300 hours campaigning. So the majority of that is going around knocking on people's doors. And that makes a big difference in how it goes. So that's 300 hours campaigning, 100 hours like doing the things that you would probably be doing anyway as a city council member. So 400 hours in a year to try to run for city council. And it's something to think about ahead of time because that's a big a big time commitment, as we both know. So it's something that, if you're thinking about serving the city, it's not too early to start having that conversation. In fact, depending on when this gets out, the city is going to show the training that the Association of Washington Cities and Municipal Research Service Center put on for elected officials, kind of a section on roles and responsibilities, a section on budgets, a section on planning, and a section on leadership and getting initiatives through and that sort of thing. So those are we're going to show them in the city council chamber, and anyone from the public can come. So if you're someone who's interested in, okay, I'm thinking about this for 2019 or maybe later, like come to these webinars and see, okay, what's the training look like? What kind of support is there? And I will say, once after the election, there's a lot of support, especially from this organization, Association of Washington Cities, which is a statewide association that represents cities. And every city in Washington is a voluntary member of Association of Washington Cities, and that provides training for us as elected officials and a lot of other support as well. So there's definitely support to learn it. It's just there's a lot to learn. You go into the city manager's office, check your mailbox, and there's another, the 2018 budget. Oh, yep, better go through that again. Some more bedtime reading. As council member Kidd likes to say, there's a lot of reading. Yeah.
Let's jump back real quick. You were talking about campaigning. How was that experience for you? And why don't you tell me also a couple of stories, if you have any, that are interesting from your door-to-door knocking?
Do you want the funny stories or the serious stories?
Well, whatever you want.
Yeah. I mean, going door to door is... I had somebody say, look, if you want to win this campaign, you need to go door to door. It's really important. You need to do that, because the key to campaigning is direct voter outreach. So do they get something from you in the mail? Does a voter, talk to you, interact with you? So having the candidate knock on your door and say, hi, I'm Lindsey, I'm running for Port Angeles City Council. I'd appreciate your vote. Can I give you some campaign literature? I mean, that's basically what I said to most people. And most people are like, oh, that's all? You're not asking me for money? Okay, great. Yeah, I've got dinner on the stove. I've got kids running around. I'm on my way out to work. Like, yeah, most people, that's it. They take the campaign literature and that's it. There's some funny stories too. I mean, for sure. One of my favorite... No, I don't think I should tell it on the air. I'll leave that.
Well, tell us ones that, or you can tell it without giving up information as to location, person, and whatnot. I mean,
don't worry, I would have done that anyway.
Okay. But yeah, if there's any funny ones that
Okay, we'll do it. So I knock on this door. This woman comes to the door. I'm like, hi, I'm Lindsey. I'm running for city council. Can I give you some campaign literature? She's like, oh, great. And I was standing at the door a little while before she answered the door, and I was smelling brownies, right? And so before she turned away, I was like, are you baking brownies? And she said, no, it's actually this incense. It's this brownie-flavored incense. And I was like, it smells really good. It totally smells like brownies. Like, I totally thought that you were just baking brownies. She's like, no, it's my favorite incense. I was like, where do you get it? And she was like, well, I've only been able to find it at one place. You know the porn store? And I was like, oh, by the post office? She's like, yeah, but it's the only thing I buy there. So, I don't know if you should put that on the air.
Yeah, we'll see about that.
You might edit that one out.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, in more seriousness, like a lot of people had serious concerns, right? And that, I think, is this thing. Okay, besides, it's valuable as a candidate to go door to door so that the voters know you. You've had that direct voter contact. That means a lot in how people vote. More importantly, as a candidate, you learn more about who the people in Port Angeles are. I walked down streets I'd never been down. I'd never been like way up some of the streets off Mount Angeles Road, and I didn't even know there was Victoria Street in Port Angeles, that sort of thing, right? And knocking on people's doors and having this ability to say, you know, oh, what are you concerned about? People will tell you, hey, I'm really concerned about this. Some people were very kind of single issue voters, like they want to know your position on this or that. And you know, you got to say, hey, this is my belief on that. Other people kind of are just more general, and other people just wanted to talk, and sometimes you had to say, hey, I still haven't had lunch and it's 2 o'clock, I got to keep going. But learning about what people's concerns are and really getting a better sense of how, what people want to see for Port Angeles, that's really key. And so I really appreciated the opportunity to do that. You know, it's a lot of time out. The days get pretty short by the time you get into, you know, late October, early November. And it's a big time commitment for candidates, but it's something that I don't regret at all. There's another attorney who works here in town who lives in Port Townsend, and she was running for Port Townsend City Council, and she didn't have an opponent. And at first I thought, oh, how lucky is that, right? Like, no opponent, you know, you don't have to spend 300 hours campaigning. But in hindsight, I'm really glad I did, because I know more about what people's concerns are. And I tried to knock on, you know, every door that was on the list. And for people who aren't familiar with campaigning, the city auditor's office will give you a list of who the registered voters are. So it's, you know, you're only knocking on the doors of registered voters, which is part of the reason why it's important for people to register to vote, because if you're not registered to vote, a candidate isn't going to start knocking your door. I was imagining before the campaign, well, if I don't have an opponent, I'll still go out and do that, and I'll like do a voter registration campaign too. But like the practicality of it is, once you're in there and once you're campaigning, it's triage mode and you don't have that much time, and you really just need to focus on you know, talking to the people who are likely to vote. So that's that walking list from the auditor's office. So not only are you only knocking on the doors of people who are registered to vote, the auditor tells you not how people voted, let's be clear about that, but the fact that they turned in a ballot. So you take that walking list and you say, okay, if somebody didn't bother turning in a ballot in November 2016, that was a pretty big election. If they didn't bother turning in a ballot for that election, they're probably not going to bother turning in a ballot in November 2017 for a small off-year election with just some city council stuff on it. So I'm probably going to skip that house. So not only is it important to register to vote, but it's also important to actually turn in the ballot. And that way you're on that list as somebody who votes. I don't know how you voted. Actually, I don't even know if you actually filled in anything. At least you turned in the ballot. And that means that you're going to get campaign literature from candidates. If they're walking around, they're going to knock on your door. You're on that list of somebody who the candidates need to talk to. And sometimes it was really sad for me as a candidate walking around to see how many houses were not on my walking list. And you know, sometimes I saw this a lot with you know, apartment buildings, right? Some apartment buildings are nicer than others, let's be honest, right? And honestly, the more lower income apartment buildings had a lot fewer people on my walking list. The nicer apartment buildings had a lot more people on my walking list. Often they had a locked door and I couldn't get in. But you know, I could see how many people and the size of the building. And so that's a huge thing for us right now, is who's actually voting. And then as a candidate, whose vote matters for, you know, getting elected. Now for me, I think I represent everybody in Port Angeles, whether they voted or not, whether they live in a rundown apartment building or a nice apartment building or their own house or rent a house, whatever, or if they're homeless under the street. But you know, as a candidate, when you're door knocking, you're getting the perspective of the people who bother to turn in their ballots, and that's really important. The other thing to point out is in the election that we had last November, 61% of the votes were cast by people age 55 and older. So we were elected by people 55 and older, right? 61% of the votes. So if you look at, who's who in Port Angeles, I don't think that's really representative of who Port Angeles is. And so it's important for younger people to get out and register and turn in their ballots and take an active role. I mean, sometimes there's cynicism about elected officials. There's various jokes, and I appreciate them, like, don't vote, it only encourages them, stuff like that. But there's a lot of power that people in office have, and it's important for us to represent the people, and that happens best when the people broadly participate in the political process. And voting is one way, not the only way, but one way to do that.
So let's jump into from campaigning at the door-to-door to another thing that you mentioned, your opponent, which was me. Thinking back onto all the debates that we've had, tell me your experience of the actual debates where you actually had to be up there with me, going against me. What was that like for you? How did you size me up? Tell me a little bit about that.
Oh, that's so not fair.
Oh, that's okay. And you can believe me. You can be completely brutally honest. You're not going to hurt my feelings. It's an experience that everyone, especially who's going to potentially run, like you said, will have to face. And they're going to have to hear criticism, because once you're there, once you're elected, you're criticized by everyone, whether they voted or they didn't.
Yeah. Oh, tell me about it. You're at least this round, you were spared that part. So, as you pointed out, Arthur, we were opponents in this race. And so we had a lot of time together at forums. This was different civic clubs, different non-governmental organizations hosting these candidate forums, either for their own membership or for the public at large, or on the radio or whatever. And so we were debating. I really appreciated you as a candidate in that both of us kept it about the issues, and I don't think we jabbed each other personally. And so it's something where I like that we were talking about the ideas. I mean, this is something I realized about myself, a dozen years or so ago, is that I'm really interested in ideas. I mean, some people are really good at working with their hands. Some people are really good at working with people. Some people are really good at working with the built environment. I'm really good at working with ideas. And that's why I got involved with law, because it's about policy and it's about the rules that govern our behavior as a community. And why do we do certain things some way? Why don't we do it another way? One big influence there is law. Another big influence is culture. And sometimes those two things intertwine. They frequently intertwine. But so I love talking about policy. And when people were asking us questions about, okay, what do we do about homelessness? Okay, what do we do about opioid addiction? Okay, what do we do about harbor cleanup? Like these different issues, I enjoyed those discussions. So we found, I think, that I could talk forever, and you had, I think, short and direct answers. And so, I definitely took up more airtime during those debates. I don't know if that was better or worse. I think it probably led people to say, oh, that person knows more because they're able to talk about it more thoroughly. But I'm a lawyer, so I talk, that's my profession, right? And I talk about policy and I debate and that sort of thing. I mean, mostly I read and write, to be honest. I don't get to talk all that much. But, yeah, I'm not sure. What else should I say about it? What was your experience?
Well, it's not about me. No, we can do that afterwards. By the way, if you need to take a break or have some water, let me know, because we can take a break or anything like that.
Okay.
How much time do you have, by the way, to do this? How much did you edit?
Well, my main concern is how much do you want to edit?
Well, that doesn't matter to me, because part of it is, for the most part, I think I'm going to take one of these cameras and actually just after it airs, I'm going to put out there the full interview, so that way, I'm not saying you
Yeah.
would, but someone is going to say, oh, well, that's just edited. So once that's done and it airs, I'm going to put the full
Yeah.
interview,
Yeah.
On YouTube, so that way people can say, oh, no, it actually syncs up and that's right. And,
Yeah.
and I might edit out volume if there's anything that's said that shouldn't be, known people's identities or something like that, that's there. You can see that we'll be talking about it, but it won't be audible.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Okay, so the brownie joke is going on.
Right. There might be, some snippets of it, but if it starts to, be something where someone might recognize and feel embarrassed or whatnot, it'll definitely be muted out, and you'll know that, hey, that's when they were laughing about that, but that would be you and me.
All right.
So, okay. Oops. I actually got some notifications popping up here, so getting in my way. Get my way. And that is the one challenge with this being that you do it on a low budget with the equipment that you have. You got pop-ups and things coming up all
Oh,
the
yeah.
time. But so since we're talking about campaigning and everything else, so you've been a lawyer for how long now?
I finished law school in 2013, passed the bar that year, so I've been practicing law since October 2013.
2013, okay. Yeah. And then, so that's fairly recent.
Yeah.
When did you become interested in politics or law in general? When was the earliest that you had an inkling for it?
That's a good question. I mean, back in high school, Port Angeles High School, for your volunteer service hours, a friend and I did voter registration. So I guess there was some interest in politics even back then. I realize now, looking back, I was involved in some stuff that kind of influenced me to think about politics. So one of those things was the sorry about that.
Oh, that's okay. That's fine, because I'm noticing the temperature's dropping in here, so.
Okay. So one of those things was, in high school I was involved in Youth in Government, which is a program that's still going on here in Port Angeles. It's hosted through the YMCA, and it gives high school students an opportunity to actually sit in the seats of the state legislature, the House and the Senate, and go through kind of a mock legislative process. And I did that for a couple of years in high school. And I didn't really realize that was influential, but maybe that was in some way. So I had some of those experiences in high school. And then I went to college. I went to Oberlin College in Ohio. I was mostly interested in music and science, but I had the opportunity to live and eat in student cooperatives. Oberlin has these student cooperatives where basically the students run these big houses ourselves, and dining halls where you serve 100 people. So it's like 100 students in one dining hall, 100 students in another, sort of thing. And it's totally run on consensus decision making. So we decide as a full group how we're going to organize ourselves, how we're going to make decisions. And those were major influencing things for me in the process of groups making decisions together. So I was involved in kind of the facilitation of these processes and saying, okay, so this is the meeting we have, what are we going to do about it? And that was a big influence for me. At the same time, I went to college during the global justice movement, where people were protesting the World Trade Organization, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the World Economic Forum. And those organizations and what they stood for was something that I was keenly aware of and involved with, the process of saying, wait, we want a more democratic system where people's human rights are respected, where the governments are able to protect protect people's natural environments, protect the environment, and make sure that people are able to make ends meet where they live without being subjected to the whims of multinational corporations. And so that was a big influence for me. I then came back. I was also influenced during college by the idea that if you want to make positive change in the world, go to the place you're from. So I said, hey, I like the Olympic Peninsula. I like Port Angeles. I want to go back. I'm not sure what I'm going to do. And so I came back home. I found a job as an AmeriCorps environmental educator. This was actually in Port Townsend for my first year back at the Port Townsend Marine Science Center. So I lived there. I was actually thinking about it today when I was thinking about how we find solutions to affordable housing. I was a professional house sitter for a year. I moved around between different places, put everything I had on my bike, kept a lot of extra stuff under my desk at work. And there were a few nights when I'd sleep on the beach, but otherwise, I had arranged a series of house sitting gigs that worked out. But yeah, it's a transient thing when you're, AmeriCorps are like city council, they're a stipend position and you don't have that much income, and it would have, more than all of it would have gone to just renting a room in somebody's house. So after that, I'd been exposed to Olympic Park Institute, what's now called Nature Bridge out at Lake Crescent. I'd done a wilderness first responder course there halfway through my AmeriCorps. And I said, hey, this is probably a place to go from this AmeriCorps job to continue to do science education, because I was finding that I liked being able to use what I'd been learning in school about science, about chemistry, physics, biology, ecology, systems theory, and teaching kids how to inquire into how the world works on their own. So that was a big part of what we did at Olympic Park Institute, was teaching the scientific method, teaching kids how to ask questions and then how to test those questions and figure out what was really going on. So I really enjoyed that process. I did that for a number of years. And that job transitioned into working with the Lower Awakalam tribe on a National Science Foundation funded Opportunities for Enhancing Diversity in the Geosciences program, where we're working specifically with kids, with Native kids, mostly Klallam kids, on traditional ecological knowledge education and geosciences education. So I did that for a couple of years, and during that process, I realized that I was more interested in community organizing. I was more interested in how we look at the systems that are influencing kids' lives, rather than saying, hey, I'm going to teach you about how to think better in the world as you go forward in it, which is important, and I'm not getting down on that. But I was saying that I didn't want to just say to kids, okay, this is critical thinking, this is the scientific method, this is how you think critically in the world and try to solve the problems that we're facing as a society. But I wanted to be involved in working on trying to solve some of those problems now. And so that led me to thinking, okay, maybe I'll apply to the planning commission for the city. And I either almost applied or maybe even submitted my application when I thought, I'm not sure how far I'll be able to go in this based on my qualifications now. I mean, I have a bachelor's degree, and it could take me a lot of places, but I don't really understand what I'm getting into. So I wanted to understand how the system works. And I thought, okay, how do I do that? And I debated whether to do an applied economics degree, like a master's in public policy, master's in public administration sort of thing, or whether to do a law degree. This is this perpetual thing of what's really kind of at the base of driving how our society, how our economy, how it all works together. And is it more economics or is it law? And I was influenced by hearing some people speak about monetary theory and realizing that a lot of the things that we take for granted in our economy really come from the way that the law structures things like money, really kind of base concepts that we take for granted a lot. And that led me to saying, I'm going to study law. And then, sure enough, you find yourself studying contracts and property and constitutional law and these very basic things that, torts, liability. These are the things that drive people's behavior. and it was really valuable. I'm not saying it's the only way to learn more about how the system works. There's a lot of other ways to do that. But for me, it really clicked, and I really appreciated the skills that I was getting from law school. And now I mostly work on constitutional law issues around what can government do, what can't government do, and I think most importantly, how does government stay accountable to the people? And so I'm really fortunate in being able to do what I set out to do through the graduate school that I did. And that's not always the case for people, which is sometimes really tough. But that's my path.
That, who inspires you now? With what you're doing now, between your law practice and the city council, who do you look up to for motivation, for inspiration?
That's a good question. I really appreciate people who, recognize where things are at in the world and also don't take that to just throw up their hands and say, well, I've got mine, I'm taken care of. But instead say, I'm responsible as part of our society, as part of our community for taking a stand, however people want to do it, and saying, I'm going to try to make our world better. And I think those are people who inspire me. Whether it's kids, whether it's kids being themselves or like protesting or whatever they do, whether it's adults who really commit to becoming experts in a particular area, whether it's people who make the world a better place. I mean, we recently worked with some contractors on our house, and they just made it better, and just, I look at it and I'm like, oh, I can't adjust the trim of the door. I'm just going to push it in all the time. And it's like, it's not that hard, right? It's not that hard to fix it. But I tend to go and work on ideas, as I said before, that's more of what I end up living in. And so I appreciate people who manage the built environment and transform the built environment into something that is more functional for people, and works better and looks better in the long run. So I don't know.
Is there anyone from the past or currently specifically that you kind of look to for their traits, this person, because they can really speak well about this, or they've done this and it's inspiring for me to kind of either mimic it or go off of that with what I do?
It's a good question.
So I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
I lean towards the right, and I am a big Rush and Hannity fan. They especially in terms of financial policies for any organization, I think that is crucial for me. And they inspired me basically partially to run and think, the city's got financial issues. I have a business background because I have my own business, which you do as well. So, for me, that was very inspiring. Are there any people like that you look up to for traits?
I'm pretty skeptical and pretty cynical. I try not to let that influence how I live in the world, but it does influence how I take inspiration, I guess, and probably being way too candid for the interview. But so people will say things, and I'm like, that's inspiring. People's honesty about, like what you just said. These are my influences. This is how I get inspiration. I'm like, go to it. Be empowered by the people who that works for. So somebody who one day I'm like, wow, they're really inspiring. The next day maybe they say something and I'm like, you know what? I think I disagree with that. I'm going to be skeptical about that. And I think it's important. For me, it's important to say, yeah, I like what you're providing there. I might not like it there. I like what you're providing there. I might not like it there. We're in the middle of a policy debate right now, around single-use carry-out plastic bags in the city, right? There's a lot of issues, and somehow we're involved in this one. And I, fielded phone calls from somebody who is concerned about it. I've been in an email discussion with someone who just referred to the people who are opposing it as fascists, right? I mean, so I'm like, whoa, that's a pretty extreme. I don't think they're fascists. But it's something where like I can learn from people who I disagree with. And so does that mean I'm inspired by them? Maybe not. But I'm going to value that interaction. And at the same time, sometimes I might say, even with somebody who I agree with, it's like, okay, but you're not really like moving this forward in a way that's very useful. Sometimes people go around in circles and it's like, just, put it on paper as a business plan and let's move forward on this. So I'm not sure if I can name names as like
That's okay.
who my inspiration
I'll let
is.
that slide. So how about we go into something similar to that, which is, what is your style or your mantra that you go by then for this to keep keep yourself going?
I've said to myself since I was like probably in high school, I want to try and leave the world a better place than when I came into it. So, what does that mean for my work? I do a lot of community service work. I mean, a lot of volunteer work. I'm sitting in this chair because I'm on the city council trying to serve the people of Port Angeles. With my legal work, most of it is public interest work. So there's a larger purpose besides just helping one individual get more money, which is what a lot of the law is about. And so, that's kind of what keeps me going. One thing I've been trying to do is remember that also means that I need to be a happy person and take care of myself in the world as well. That it's not, you can't burn yourself out. And that's really important, no matter what we do, to remember that self-care is part of the process of making the world a better place. So that's something that I've been trying to work on in the last year as well.
Okay. Now let's go to some tougher questions. I wouldn't say tough, but they're, a little bit more involved into your current role. Let's start off with the easier version of that, and let's see. Tell me something that you've learned in your new role. Stuff that you've learned that you think is interesting or challenging, or whoa, I was not prepared to sign up for this.
Yeah. It's funny you say that these are more challenging. For me, the personal questions are more challenging than the policy sort of questions.
We'll jump back to that.
Yeah, put me in the hot seat. So, for me, like I think about policy making, and the city council is the legislative branch of the city government. It's the policy making branch. The city staff, led by the city manager, is the executive branch of the city government. They execute the policy. It's the executive branch. And the policy is created by the city council. So I'm interested in being in the policy end of it. I'm on the city council. That works out well. So I think of policy often as, okay, it's the words on the page of the proposed ordinance, right? It's the plan. It's that sort of stuff. But to get there, we have to go through this whole process, which some people just shorten and call politics, but it's really relationships. And so in the last couple of months, I've been trying to learn the relationships of this organization that we call the City of Port Angeles. And how do the dynamics work among the staff members who are human beings, who are, part of our community, right? It's not like it's the city and the constituents. It's like we're all intertwined, just like any organization. Peninsula Area Public Access. There are dynamics in how the organization works, and those dynamics are created by human beings. So trying to understand how the City of Port Angeles works as an organization, with its goods and bads, with its ins and outs, like how do I propose policy without stepping on people's toes? Who do I need to talk to make sure that we've teased out these little nuances of how things really work or how it doesn't work, and how to propose affordable housing policy in ways that are going to actually work instead of sit on the shelf, sit in the Port Angeles Municipal Code and not do anything. So that's the part that for some reason I was just naive to, in terms of like, of course it's about relationships. Of course that's really what it comes down to, is how well can I have a relationship with the other 6 members on the city council and the city manager and the directors who sit up sit up in the seats on the side of the chamber? How well can I have a relationship with the people who come to the city council meetings? How well can I have a relationship with the people who don't come to the city council meetings for whatever reason they don't come there? And how do we make that work? It's a challenge. A lot of the times we're discussing things over email, and this happens for us as city council members. We get emails from people, many of whom I don't know, and trying to have a relationship with somebody over email is sometimes really difficult. Would it be better to say, hey, let's go have coffee and do that? Absolutely. Is there time for that? No, there's not time for that on every issue that people get in touch with us on. So it's this constant challenge of figuring out how do we build these relationships in ways that help us to work together. And that's really key for us to work as a community, is to not see ourselves as, hey, these are the people I hang with, these aren't the people I hang with. But to say, I'm going to build relationships with people who I might initially think I don't have anything in common with. But as we go forward, we find that we have a lot more to share and a lot more that we can do collectively than we can do if we see the divisions between ourselves.
Okay. So you kind of touched on one of these questions here that I was looking at. How have you, or are you going to motivate the staff and council?
It's a good question. I think that the city staff ultimately run the city, right? I mean, let's not mince words about it. It's their job. They wake up in the morning, go to work, they come home, sometimes at 5, sometimes at 7, sometimes they're back on Sundays, right? Like, it's their life. They're civil servants in the traditional sense of the word, as in they work for the government. And so, for city staff members, most of what they do is the things that we take for granted, unless we really start to think about, okay, what does it take to keep the lights on? What does it take to have running water? What does it take to get rid of wastewater? What does it take to manage stormwater? Oh, wait, wastewater and stormwater are actually separate utilities? I mean, there's a whole lot of things. What does it actually take to run a police department, to run a fire department, to connect that with Olympic Medical Center and the hospital, to manage the road system, to manage the risks and liabilities that the city faces, to figure out a budget for a $120 million organization? All of this just takes a lot of time. And that's why there's a lot of city staff. Most of it's the day in and day out of running a city, and people don't complain when the lights are on. People complain when the lights are off. And so then there's the parts that are the things that are these issues that we talk about. Okay, affordable housing is a huge one, and it's one that I've decided I want to try to figure out how we can address this, because it affects so many other things. It trickles out into homelessness. It affects whether somebody with substance abuse issues is able to be housed and thus have the stability to get treatment. It affects whether we're able to have more jobs in Port Angeles, because if an employer is looking at bringing their employees here and they realize that the vacancy rate is less than 2%, they know their employees are going to have a hard time finding a place to live. Is this really where you want to relocate your business? Is this really where you want to expand and have more employees when people can't find housing? So it affects everything about our society and our economy. And so, how do we address that? That's something that when you go on a day-to-day basis, most of the city staff don't have anything to do with, but it's something that's tremendously important for us as a community. So, I'm trying to figure out, and this gets back to relationships, right, is how do we address some of these critical issues, I'll use housing as an example, that are really complex, involve multiple causes, and could have multiple solutions. How do we move those forward in ways that get us to what we want? And I'd say just specifically, I'd rather see a vacancy rate around 6%, which is what policy analysts say is a more optimal vacancy rate. So, is there a housing department at the city? No. there's a planning department, there's a public works department, there's a finance department, there's a legal department, there's police, fire. If I didn't say public works already, I should have said public works. But there's no housing department, right? So we need to say, okay, how do we create the policy? Who do we need to talk to? Who from planning do we need to talk to? Who from legal do we need to talk to? Do we need to talk to anybody in public works? Probably. I don't know yet who those people should be. And so, trying to figure out how we get these relationships together and then say, okay, let's do something inspiring for the people. Let's create the kind of policies that people want to see. I mean, I think with the last election, if you looked at, who ran, who didn't run, 3 of the incumbents said, I'm not even running. 1 of the incumbents ran and lost in the primary, which is, I thought was pretty remarkable because typically an incumbent has a very strong advantage in an election. And so a lot of people have said, the last city council election was, a vote for a change in the city. And I think it's important for us to deliver on that. And that has to be a cooperative effort between the city council and the city staff. It also has to be a cooperative effort between the city, the staff and the council, and the people of Port Angeles. And I've said to people, don't hesitate to lobby us. Tell us what changes we should see. Tell us what we need to do to make this a better place for you, for your family, for your whole community. And let's see what we can do, because we're in a time right now when we really need to be, I think, inspirational with our policy and creative with our policy, and at the same time recognizing that there's risks with that, but we have some really serious challenges that we need to address, and if we fail to address them, it's going to be harder to fix them as we go forward into the future.
So with that in mind, how do you reach a decision when you don't have all the facts on certain issues or ideas, and you may never get all the information needed, or it's overlooked? How do you reach a decision?
It's a great question. I mean, right now we're between the first hearing and the second hearing of probably the first controversial decision that we've had as a new council. And so, how is it currently working? We get a council packet on, the Thursday before a Tuesday city council meeting. So it's like Thursday night, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and then you're meeting to discuss it. The council already decided to put this issue forward, ask the city attorney's office to draft an ordinance, and that's then in the packet. So we've got some time to look at what's there. We have a public hearing. People bring up new ideas, right? So there was a lot of stuff presented at that public hearing that was like, oh, that we should think about that more. Oh, wait, this needs tweaked, right? And so now we're in the middle of this drafting process, and we're going to put out on Monday a new version of this ordinance, and then so that's this coming Monday, and then on the following Tuesday, so like 8 days from then, we'll have another meeting where we'll discuss it, have the second hearing, possibly vote to approve it. Does that work as a process? I mean, I was talking to somebody the other day who said, yeah, there was, there were some comments, and then the council started talking, and the council thought that the model to use was the ordinance from Bellingham. Actually, the newest one is Tacoma, and that's the better one to draw from. But somehow we missed that, and no one corrected it because the person who knew in the audience didn't feel like they could raise their hand and say, actually, pull from Tacoma, don't pull from Bellingham. And so, we used an older version of a model ordinance. So, okay, now we're in the middle of this process. Do we go back and kind of rewrite the whole thing using the newer template that's going to have more of the fixes that people have learned along the way in other places working on this issue? Or do we say, okay, this is good enough and go forward? What about everything that we've learned, fielding phone calls and emails from people between the first hearing and the second hearing? Can we actually get those folded in that second hearing so that we can actually edit the ordinance at the meeting and make it work. So this is, for me, it's a new process. I've never been elected before. As an attorney, I do the drafting like the city attorney does, and then, give it to the policymakers who, hash it out and do the sausage making, as it's referred to sometimes. And so, I want to see is this the right process for it? Maybe I think it could use some tweaking. So, for example, what I'm doing now is, we've talked about housing needs and the need for people to be able to have housing fast. I mean, right now we have a very low vacancy rate. We've got people who are basically living in their cars, living on the street, living in shelters. And what I've noticed, and other people have suggested this to me, so I'm not taking credit for this, is that we have these RV campers, we have mobile homes, we have recreational vehicles. They're already sitting around Port Angeles. What if we connected those to electricity, water, and sewer and allowed people to rent them out? That would quickly create a lot more shelter, and it would hopefully have a positive effect on people's ability to get housing. And is it an ideal? Oh, go ahead, we're cutting.
Just take a quick second here real quick, because both of these cameras just, the storage became full.
Uh-oh.
1 second, let me take a quick make a quick change here. Stop.
All right, I'm gonna use the bathroom. Can I
go ahead.
turn the mic off?
That's perfect. So here
It is recording now.
All right, we're on.
We're on. Okay,
Cool.
so I'll hand that
Thank
back
you.
to you.
we'll continue where we left off here as soon as I turn these on. We'll let that roll.
All right.
Camera. Switch. Okay, switch is made. And let's get our back in. Okay. That's locked. So that's there. That's back on. And if this has to be a two-part, it'll be a two-part.
We could even do like before council meetings, since you're there already, or even afterward if you want to step out and like interview council members and say,
Well, I've thought about doing that, but depending on how they run like last one, it was almost 4 hours long.
oh my God, it was so long.
Geez. So, okay, and that's back on. That's on. Okay, record. Record. Yes. Yes. Okay.
All right. So I think we were talking about how you do the policymaking process. And I want to give an example of how I think it worked from last year, which was, the city provides fire service, right? And there's a rating agency that basically rates the level of fire service that the city provides. And based on that rating, insurance companies decide how much to charge people for their homeowners insurance or their business property insurance, right? So we as a city were at risk of being downgraded because we didn't have enough firefighters on staff. And the effect of being downgraded would have meant that everybody would be paying more insurance for their homeowners insurance, basically, right? So, and it's not like you pay more and get more. It would be you're paying more for the same amount of insurance, right? Only simply because we didn't have as many firefighters. So the solution was get more firefighters. And the issue, though, is that adding more firefighters was going to add more to the Medic One utility, I believe, and that would then add cost to people. So the question became, do you want to pay more to your insurance company for the same amount of insurance, or do you want to pay more for Medic One on your utility bill and actually get more service from the fire department? And I mean, that can make the difference between the fire department just responding to calls, which is kind of what was happening, to actually being able to be proactive and do fire prevention trainings, look at buildings to make sure they know what the building looks like in case there's ever a fire there, help people to think about how we do better medical stuff. Right now, because of this change, or maybe in part because of this change, the fire department is working on a community response program that's going to help with being more responsive to people's medical needs when people call. And it's going to help with more prevention, which, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So that was the dynamic, right, is we're going to have to increase the medical utility. And what Ken Dubuque, the fire chief, did is he went out and he talked to the people who are going to be most affected by this change, which are the elder care centers, the places, Parkview Villa, those sorts of places that have a lot of medical calls for, it was mostly medical, I guess, was the issue. And so they said, this looks great, thanks for reaching out to us. Go for 4 new firefighters. That seems like the best scenario. The question was 2, 3, or 4 new firefighters. And so, the city proactively reached out to the people who had the most stake in the process, as well as also generally advertising and saying, hey, this is something that's going on, let's talk about it. I think that's a better way to go, because it says, hey, we're proactively thinking about what the effect of our policy is going to have on people, trying to make sure, not just saying, hey, you didn't speak up during the process, but actually going to somebody and saying, hey, this is going to affect you. Let's talk about how, and if that's what you want to see happen. And so there was no opposition to that utility rate going up, as far as I'm aware, from being at the council meetings where it was happening. And I think that's really because of the proactive policy of going out to the people who are most affected. So that's something that I'm looking to for when we do policy making, when we come up with ideas as council members. I want people to have the chance to provide input and ideas before we even get to the first public hearing, because it's important for people to have the opportunity to think about, well, what is the best policy for our city? And for me, as somebody proposing policy, it's important for me to get input from people, because I don't know all the issues. I don't know what all the little nuances might be. There might be something that I'm not thinking of. We all have our blind spots and we all have our biases. I need to know, hey, what's a potential downside of this policy, so that either we can, maybe worst case, scrap the proposed policy altogether. Maybe we can tweak the policy and minimize the side effects. Maybe we can find a way to do it differently so that we just don't even have that problem at all. But there's all sorts of reasons to do it collaboratively. And that's my hope that, we were talking a little bit during the break with somebody else about, hey, this new city council, let's see what they can do. Well, let's see what we can do as a community, because the city council really is just the representatives of the people. And, we can propose things on our own, but we really need the people to say, hey, this is a priority, this is going to happen. I had somebody ask me, okay, why does the city have money to put up suicide barriers on the 8th Street bridges when the city doesn't have money for addressing mental health and the opioid crisis? And I think part of it is there were hundreds of people coming to city council meetings saying, we demand this action.
So how do you feel about that? Because you do have the option of saying to people that, no, right now this is not a priority, so we will table it. How do you feel about that situation where statistically the county put out statistics and really it's only like 4 people a year who jump off the bridge, versus there are many other areas in the community where people commit suicide, whether it be through hanging themselves or whichever other method. How do you feel about putting that much money into one particular area, such as the barriers, versus where that money can go much further for something else? Yeah, and the usual method is shooting yourself, I think, statistically, but there might be some other ones. Shooting yourself, suicide by firearm is typically the male in their 50s to 70s is the statistic for firearms. The most has been, I believe, if I remember, which I can ask my wife, she's the one who compiled the statistics,
She's got the
is,
statistics.
the highest one is actually
Slitting your wrist.
slitting your wrist or slitting one of your major arteries and bleeding out. So not to say that, I know firearms are a hot topic lately, but let's not say that that's the main method.
Yeah,
'Cause
yeah.
It's really one of the smaller methods and to a very key demographic. But how do you feel about that money going towards those barriers where it could go much further in a different direction?
Yeah, so that was, originally the question, and when it came up, I had that same thought. It's like, okay, we're going to spend $1 million. We'll just, we can talk about the numbers in more detail if we want, but we're going to spend $1 million on suicide prevention. Aren't there a lot of ways that we could prevent more suicides for $1 million than the barriers on the 8th Street Bridge? And that was a question that, a number of people said to me. And, I had that question as well, right? And so then I started to look into, okay, what really works, what doesn't work here? And there's research in public health saying that once a place has been identified as a suicide hotspot, like a bridge that people jump off of, that putting barriers on that structure is effective. It does not just move the suicides to a different location. It's not like the person who's walking over the bridge is like, oh, I can't jump off this bridge, so I'm going to go home and slit my wrist. Most of the time, that person does not go on to commit suicide. There's some research about people who have jumped off structures who survive. They tried to commit suicide and they were unsuccessful. That 9 out of 10 of them don't go on to commit suicide again. So what it is it's this impulsive thing. It's a period of extreme depression, and the opportunity presents itself, and the opportunity looks really easy. And unfortunately, once you're over the side, you can't change your mind. And it's a fairly lethal form of suicide as well. On the other hand, there are people, certainly there's people who, deliberate about suicide and plan it out and write the suicide note and all that. And, those aren't the people who are typically climbing over the bridge. We've gotten some comments about, well, people are just going to bring a ladder down the bridge and put the ladder up in the suicide barrier and jump off. It's like, well, no, somebody who's that determined to do suicide, they're going to find another way. So in terms of using that money for that purpose, I think it makes sense because the bridges are a suicide hotspot. I wish that a decade ago, when the bridges were being redesigned, the people who were involved in the planning, who recommended suicide barriers, had been listened to, because that was part of the process at the time, and it would have been $400,000. So we could have spent $400,000 then, and now we're spending, in total, it's going to be about $1.4 million. So an extra $1 million.
If everything goes right.
If everything goes right. There's currently some state funding that is not yet determined, but looking like it's a positive direction. And so that's a lot more, right?
I believe it actually did go through. I believe it did.
Did it?
Through to get the funding.
Okay, great, cool.
So we will be getting that 300,000 or something like that.
Yeah, like 350,000, I think, is what we asked for.
So, and then going along with that, how do you feel after you make a decision, or knowing that you're going to make a decision where a percentage of the population doesn't agree with your choices or the choice that you could potentially make? Because let's face it, usually it's either 50-50 split or somewhere near that of people who are for or against something. How does it make you feel, or what do you think of, or how do you feel making these decisions or having made a decision?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I want to make sure that I've listened to the people who disagree with the direction that I'm going. I want to make sure that I'm thinking, okay, am I going this way because of a bias, or is this really the best policy that we can put forward? Are there ways that we can take people's concerns and make the policy better? We're working on that right now with the current ordinance. And so, at the end of the day, did I know going into elected office that I work for the people of Port Angeles, not a particular individual in Port Angeles? Yes. I mean, that's part of the challenge of making decisions as a community. Are there better decision-making methods that we could work toward? I think so. I mean, I think we can be more collaborative, and if it's a 50-50 split, let's figure out if there's ways to think outside the box where we can get more people to say, yeah, this is a better policy. There are certainly policies or issues in the United States where, both sides feel like they're protecting public health, or both sides feel like they're protecting safety, or both sides feel like they're protecting people's lives and freedom. I mean, there's issues where it just divides because we have similar, people are thinking like, this is the issue that I'm right about, and you're just dead wrong. And fortunately, the city doesn't deal specifically with those issues a lot of the time. But we can often go and say, okay, well, is there another way to address the underlying social issues that are present there in ways that don't put us in this kind of 50-50 split? But yeah, I mean, it's hard. If there's a room of people saying no, I think it's important to listen and say, okay, well, what is going on here? And if I, as an elected official, feel very strongly about something, but my constituents are saying no, I don't think it's my job to railroad it through. I think it's my job to say, well, this is why I think this is important. Let's talk about it as a community, and let's do that educational work and say, this is something that I think is important. Can I convince you that it is as well? But I don't think government should be ramming stuff down people's throats. That's obviously.
How about if it's actually better for them, but they just don't realize it? Like a policy that will affect the overall population. It will affect them in a more favorable or in a better way for them, but they just don't know it.
It's funny, there's a saying about taxes, that taxes are mutual coercion, mutually agreed upon. And I'm not totally sure if that's the best description for it. But sometimes government is that. I mean, no one wants to pay their taxes, but yet what situation would we be in if we didn't have them? And so it's an example of each individual is like, oh, I'd rather not do this. But collectively, we then have this pool of resources that we're able to use in better ways. I'd rather have a police department than have the people who can afford it hiring private security and the people who can't afford it having to do self-defense. I'd rather have a fire department than my next door neighbor's house catching fire and it causes my house to catch fire through no fault of my own. Fire department's there for good reason. So, I mean, we have government to address these areas where it makes sense to collectively collectivize our resources. I think I strayed from your question, though.
No, I think that kind of answers. I mean, unless you want to get more specific.
There was somewhere where I wanted to go with it. Can you ask it again?
Sorry, now I'm like, so we were talking about
it was about what if people disagree?
Yeah, what if people disagree?
Yeah, I mean,
would you, or basically, if they disagree, or if it would be better for the populace?
Oh, right. Sometimes people don't know what's good for them.
Right.
Yeah, I'm really.
They just don't know all the information, and they couldn't do it because maybe there's something preventing you from saying, "Look, this is better for you, but I just can't tell you."
I think that's a dangerous policy for policymakers to go down. That's where we as a country have said, Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. Just believe us. We know things that you don't know. Turns out they were wrong. And they were just flat out wrong. They've been given bad intelligence, and just believe me, I know what's better for you. It has now led to the rise of ISIS and all sorts of other problems, right? So the whole, they're nice people, but they just don't know how to manage themselves. That kind of paternalism is a very dangerous place for government to go to and for elected officials to go to. So I feel very strongly about the idea of democracy, about consent of the governed in our government. And that's the underpinnings, that's what we celebrate on the 4th of July. But what we actually do is often very different from that. And many of us feel like we have no agency in this system of government, and that's a huge problem. So when we get to a place with policymaking where I think I know what is good for people, but people are telling me, no, that's not good for me, I need to be careful about that. And are there going to be people who say, well, that's stupid and that's wrong, and on probably everything we do. I mean, maybe even those finance policies we just passed that no one wanted to read. I'm like, why am I reading this again in the new council packet? There's almost always going to be somebody who's saying, no, this isn't. So I'm not saying if I hear one person say no, then it's a bad idea, but can I understand their reasons? And can I make sense of them in light of my views? And is that a opinion held by a lot of people, in which case maybe this isn't the right policy at the right time, even if I feel strongly about it. And the idea that I know what's better for people is a dangerous path for an elected official to go down. And it's something we need to be very careful about.
Okay. So now you are only a few months into your term. Thinking about the future, how will Port Angeles be different after your term?
It's a good question. One of the things I hope to accomplish in the next 3 years and a quarter, or 3 years and 3/4, is that we can do some things around the intersecting issues of housing, homelessness, mental health, substance abuse, and those things. It's an area that we are very divided on as a community. I mean, there's folks who are doing vigilante violence against the homeless, and I think that's really unacceptable. We view them, some people in our community view people who are homeless as not of our community, as if they came here from somewhere else. There's a persistent idea that, they're getting bused here by social service providers in Seattle and Tacoma because we have better social services than over there. And we need to say, no, actually, these are people of our own community. In the last point in time homeless count, the highest demographic increases in homelessness were elderly single women who were priced out of their rental houses or probably apartments and now living in their cars, or it's families, right? And we need to recognize that homelessness is a systemic problem in our society, not the problem of a few individuals. And so, I'd like us to address those things as a community. And I think we can find policies, both short-term, medium-term, long-term, maybe we start to get in place by 4 years from now, but long-term is long-term, to start to change that trend as a community. I think we need to look at the reality that we live in a place that's really desirable for people to live. A lot of people do move here. I'm not, people move here and buy houses. Affluent people move here. It's a desirable place to live. And how do we accommodate that population influx while also not losing the things that make this the town that we like living in? The last thing I want to see is an influx of people coming here and changing it in ways that make it not the place that they came here for in the first place. And so how do we do that and recognize what we can be within a very rapidly changing global economy, while also keeping the things that make this the small town that people like to live in. So, there's a lot of discussion about how do we do jobs. This is a really key issue here. A lot of that focuses on, okay, how do we bring manufacturers here? And that is an important part of our economy. It's really a lot of the purview of the port. I mean, the port is a special purpose district designed for economic development. For the city, I think we need to look at the various small businesses, individual owners, sole proprietors, and also the number of people who are telecommuting for their jobs and looking at living in a place that's really desirable to live like Port Angeles, but yet commuting from a job that's based in Seattle. I mean, people like that are bringing a lot of wealth to the peninsula because their income's coming here from somewhere else. How do we make sure that that's a way to live in Port Angeles that doesn't displace longtime residents of the city, doesn't change us into basically a suburb of Seattle, and yet also recognizes that that is a growing area of our economy locally. Unless we're producing stuff locally, we're basically importing value from somewhere else. And skilled workers, telecommuting is one of those things. There's other ways to talk. I mean, we could talk about this all day too, but.
Sure.
Yeah.
So kind of going off in the other direction, what do you think the biggest mistakes the city's currently making or have made?
Ooh, biggest mistakes the city's making.
Or made.
I think this is something people say, kick the can down the road. We talked a few minutes ago about the bridges, and we could have put suicide barriers on the 8th Street bridges for $400,000 when they were being designed. Now we're doing it for $1.4 million a decade later, right? We made the wrong decision at the time, and then we pay more later. I'm not sure how much we are doing long-term forecasting for the sustainability of the infrastructure that we have now. I mean, Port Angeles, for the most part, it was built after the big squatting event in 1890, maybe 1891. I forget exactly when people, Port Angeles, basically took over the military reserve. We gridded out this area. Most of it was built in the 20th century. 20th century in the United States was an era of just expanding economic growth. And people generally said, hey, this is just going to keep getting bigger, keep expanding, it's going to keep growing, so we can build with that in mind. I think today there's a reality that it's a rise and fall. There's a book the local library has, it's called The Rise and Fall of American Growth. It looks at the US economy from the Civil War to this last decade. And so we've got a bunch of infrastructure that was built under a certain set of economic conditions that we can't take for granted anymore. So how do we say, okay, what is a sustainable level of infrastructure for us to manage as a city? Everyone wants their utility rates to go down, but what does that actually mean for maintaining the infrastructure? And my biggest concern, and I'm reassured about this by city staff, and at the same time I haven't gotten to the point where I can understand the numbers yet, and so it's a trust but verify situation. So I feel like I'm going to say it here, but I'm not saying that this is actually the situation. It's something that I want us to take a close look at, and I want to make sure that I get to the place, hopefully in the next year or so, where I can really understand what's happening here. But I'm concerned about deferred maintenance. I'm concerned that we have hundreds of miles of pipes and electrical systems and roads that we don't actually have the funds to maintain as we go into the future. And we don't want to get to the place where, we have to replace a big reservoir in the water system. That's a huge expense. Okay, all of a sudden utility bills are going to spike 20% or something like that. We don't want to be there, because that's going to really harm people who are relying on a predictable utility rate. It's going to go up over time. That's cost consumer price index stuff. That's inflation. But we don't want to be surprised by stuff down the road. So, we need to work more on our asset management, which is just, I guess, wonky speak for knowing what you own, knowing what condition it is in, and knowing when it's going to need replaced. And
so this will be kind of a two-part follow-up then. So do you think, and with that being said in the previous questions, do you think that we failed to be creative and innovate and lead on these issues. And the second part of that is, recently I've heard that we're actually going to be in worse situation and that there's going to be potential for layoffs in the city.
Yeah, so let me address the second one first because it's more specific.
Sure.
The issue there, so the city gets money from taxes for the most part. There's a property tax. It's set, even though you look at your bill and you're like, oh my God, the property tax that the city is able to collect can only increase 1% a year. So the city's property tax revenue each year can only go up by 1%. Meanwhile, inflation, consumer price index, goes up 3% plus or minus, right? So we have a structural issue there in that this revenue source, one of the main revenue sources, property taxes, only goes up 1% a year. Meanwhile, inflation is going up more like 3% a year. What does that mean for our general fund? That means that the general fund is actually shrinking over time, even though it's increasing by 1% a year, because that value is decreasing by about 2% a year because of inflation. I might have gotten that slightly wrong.
Don't worry, I won't fault you for not knowing the exact numbers.
The economists and financial analysts listening can please let me know how I misexplained that. Another source of revenue is sales tax. So sales tax is another big source. And the third is utility tax. So this is where it gets kind of tricky. The city, think of the city as a $100 million utility and a $20 million everything else, which is called the general fund. So the utility, because we run our own utilities, we don't use Puget Sound Energy. We're not part of the PUD, which is also public. Puget Sound Energy is private, right? We publicly control our own utilities. That's a huge thing for us as a city because no one's making a profit off of our utility company. We own it, right? I mean, it's kind of like that cooperative ideal from the populist era, the progressive era of like, we own the infrastructure that we need, to live a quality life. So we own our own utilities. I think that's huge, and I think that's important. That's about $100 million. That's most of the city's budget, but that's really just, the city does what's called a cost of service assessment, or a COSA. And that is saying, okay, how much is it going to cost to run the utilities? Therefore, how much should we charge people for the utilities? And the city bases the utility bills on that COSA assessment, the cost of service assessment, and then runs the utility from there. So that's really kind of passed through. So when I talk about deferred maintenance, really it's just, are we paying attention to how much things will cost? If something's going to break 30 years from now, are we actually taking account of that in our utility bills now and in our COSA analysis now? And I'm responsible for learning how to understand that. So not just reading those COSA assessments when we get to those points in the cycle, but actually trying to understand them and answer my own question of how much are we deferring maintenance and not taking it into account in our current utility bills. At the same time, that means if we are doing it, we should probably account for it in our current utility bills, but I think the surprise later on is going to be worse. So I don't want us to be deferring maintenance and then hit people with major bills in the future. Okay, so that's the utility. Meanwhile, there's the general fund. The general fund is everything else. It's police, it's fire, it's roads, it's planning, it's everything that's kind of invisible in the city, the finance people who spend their time figuring out, what's the budget going to look like? All of these, I'm constantly surprised. Public Works Department has accountants on the public works staff. Meanwhile, there's a finance department, but it makes sense for that. It's like a lot of really skilled people work at the city and do jobs that I'm still figuring out what they actually do. But general fund is everything else. That's the $20 million that, it's increasing by 1% based on the property revenue, but its value is getting less because inflation is more than 1%. So that's the part that's going to get squeezed over time. And what that means is, we're looking for other mechanisms. Last year, the people of Port Angeles passed the Transportation Benefits District. That was a sales tax increase specifically for road improvements. Well, transportation improvements, roads, sidewalks, bike paths, all that. So, we're finding these other ways, but the system really is that the state tells cities what it is we can actually do to raise revenue, and then in many ways restricts how we can spend it too. And there's big questions, going back to the populist and progressive eras of the late 19th century about how much control should cities have over that. So where was I going with this? I was going into the budget issues. Oh, so the layoffs, right? So, okay, so you've got this $20 million that is not part of the utility. The utility, it gets its money from the utility bills, but there's also a utility tax, and the utility tax funds the general fund. So based on the amount of power purchased in Port Angeles, for example, the general fund gets money through the utility tax. And so for the last year or so, the mill, now McKinley, has not been operating. So it has not been purchasing power. It buys the power through the city of Port Angeles, meaning that the amount of power the utility has been using is less, which means that the amount of utility tax has been less. That amount is around $500,000. So the utility tax amount that the general fund gets from McKinley buying power, and I'm simplifying a lot of this, but generally speaking, is about $500,000. Keep in mind the general fund is $20 million, so we're talking about $500,000 out of a $20 million fund, right? So it's a fairly significant amount of the city's general fund budget. So I know the Peninsula Daily News has published some stuff questioning whether McKinley's going to restart. I would say to people to, be cautious about, making assumptions about what's going to happen with that mill, and so just, don't assume that that's what's going to happen. So there are some questions there. If McKinley didn't restart or doesn't restart on time, the city's general fund is short up to $500,000. Out of a $2 million budget, that's a big deal. So that's where this question about layoffs comes from. How you do layoffs becomes a question really for the city manager. The structure of the city is city council sets policy, city council hires a city manager. The city manager is our only employee. The city manager then hires everybody else at the city and figures out what the staffing needs are of each department in order to get the work done that the city council tells the city it needs to do. So it's the city manager's question really about how to manage those staffing things. It's not the city council's role to be there. That said, I don't think that, layoffs at the city are a beneficial thing because, 10 years ago we went through that in the Great Recession. And, a lot of departments haven't rebounded from that back to what they were before. So it's, and when we say, okay, we want the city to be innovative, we want the city to be creative, we want the city to think about how to do things differently, that takes time, which means staff, which means we need those people to be able to do that work. So, that might be the situation of, okay, if McKinley doesn't restart, we are short on the general fund. What the ramifications are going to be, how that's going to affect each particular department, I think is too speculative at this point. But the key take home, I think, for people listening is, the more power that's purchased in Port Angeles, the more utility funds go to the city. That said, we should still make conservation efforts in our power consumption because there's other ways, and we're going to have to get more creative about how we fund local governments.
So do you think, based on everything that you've said, do you think that the city is failing to be creative and innovative, to being aware of those things and to make those changes to be ahead of it as opposed to being behind it?
Yeah, I think we need to be predictive about the directions that the policies are going to go in and not be responsive. Being responsive ends up costing us a lot more. I'll give an example. The city, along with the port and a number of industries in Port Angeles, former or current companies that are here, are all potentially liable partners for cleaning up the harbor based on toxin loads in the sediments in the harbor. And that's a result of pollution that we knew was going on and just said, well, we can do this. Who's gonna hold us accountable to it? Well, now the state's holding us accountable to it, and we're going to have to pay, along with those industries, a certain amount based on what the cleanup requirements are. So that's something where, could we have predicted that that's the direction things are going to go in? Yeah, I think we could have, and make changes ahead of time. Once again, I think an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So do we take the position where, okay, we're going to wait for somebody to sue us before we change the policy? Or do we say, we're doing this policy wrong, let's fix it now, let's be proactive? Do we say, okay, we're only going to meet the requirements that state or federal government set for us for harbor cleanup, for example? Or are we going to say, yeah, no, actually, we can tell that the trend is toward less toxins in the sediments based on shellfish harvest rates and the amount of toxins that then end up in people's bodies. Let's be proactive in making sure that we're ahead of the curve so that we don't become potentially liable parties for something else in the future. So have we failed to innovate? It's such a broad question, I don't want to answer it directly, but I think we could do a much better job about going forward in ways that say, let's keep in mind what direction things are going, and let's be ahead of the curve, not behind the curve, because ultimately it saves the taxpayer money when we're ahead of the curve.
So with all that right now that we've talked about, what keeps you up at night?
I have a stack of note cards just to write and a pen next to my desk, or next to my bed. I'm sorry, the bed is not the desk. So that when I wake up in the middle of the night thinking, oh, I forgot about this, or oh, what about that, I can write it down and go back to sleep. But usually I wake up thinking about some aspect of policy, something that is on my to-do list to draft, whether it's for my day job or for the city council work, and how to try and design things better. This morning I woke up thinking about the plastic bag ordinance and some of the nuances and drafting of that and how we could improve it. After having talked to some people who didn't like what it currently looked like and had some suggestions, I want to take their feedback into account, and I think that we can do that.
So when it comes to all these policies and future policies, are you a dreamer or are you a realist?
You have to be both. There's a saying, pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will. So, we've got to be realistic about our situation. We've got to be realistic about it economically, socially, environmentally. Not seeing what's going on is not going to benefit us. At the same time, we do need to be innovative. We do need to be creative. We do need to be optimistic in trying to come up with solutions, because just throwing in the towel isn't an option for us. I mean, we need to be a community that can work together and can go forward. I remember talking to somebody about, community in Port Angeles, and she said, this isn't a very old community. It's only been around 150 years, the city of Port Angeles, right? Or Port Angeles as, a non-native community. And, what is this place going to look like in another 150 years? Can we take that long time horizon and not just say, what's our 5-year plan, but what's our 50-year plan? What's our 100-year plan? What's our 200-year plan? And are we willing to say, we believe in the community that we have to the point that we're willing to plan for the long term? I think about kids today of, how much of their lives we're not even thinking about what the solutions are going to be during that time? Are we really taking into account, okay, how do we make this sustainable for them economically, socially, environmentally, so that they can have productive lives, so that they can actually think about having the quality of life that their parents had? Because, you know, for several decades now, quality of life has been going down in the United States, and not acknowledging that isn't going to help us change the reality of it. The longer we keep our heads in the sand, the harder it's going to be once we take them out.
Okay, so let's shift focus here, and let's talk a little bit more about people and personalities that you're involved in right now with, meaning your counterparts. How is it dealing with your other city council members right now?
Yeah, so, you know, we got to know, you know, we have 4 new council members, all of whom were campaigning at the same time. So we got to know each other well during that campaigning. Then there's 3 council members who've been on already, and their terms come up in 2 years. And, you know, we got to know them during the campaign as well. I did regrettably never have the chance to sit down with Michael Meredith, Councilmember Meredith. We had a chance to sit down, I think, in December or so, and I was really happy to be able to get to know him as well. So now we're in the situation, and this is something that, you know, is a challenge. Is as a city council, there's 7 of us. If 4 of us get together and start talking about city business, we're holding a public meeting. A public meeting in Washington needs to be publicly announced at least 24 hours in advance and open to the public, which means that we can't get together and talk. So this has come up now a few times where there have been events that a number of us have wanted to go to, and it's like, wait a second, how many other people might go to this? Oh, maybe I won't go to it, so that we don't accidentally have, you know, I think an example was Nathan West, our Director of Community and Economic Development, was speaking at the Port Angeles Business Association meeting. And obviously he's going to be talking about city business, right? So wait, how many city council members might be going to that meeting? Who's not going to go to the meeting? We have to do this little scramble with the assistance of city staff to make sure that we're not actually having a meeting over email, which is the other hitch, right? So you can have a meeting over email, and that's not allowed as well, right? Because that wouldn't be public. Another thing that you can't do through the Open Public Meetings Act is a serial meeting. So I can't say, hey, Councilmember Moran, what do you think about this? Hey, Councilmember French, what do you think about this? Hey, Councilmember Kidd, what do you think about this? Hey, Councilmember, you know, I can't do that, right? So that's something for us to think about. One, it's important for the public to be involved. This is an aspect of government transparency and accountability. So I don't look at the Open Public Meetings Act as a hassle, although it is in a logistical sense. It's like, oh, wait, we can't do it that way. We have to give 24 hours notice, right? Like, but how do we say, okay, this is the necessary minimum, and it is a minimum, for being accountable and open to the people. So how do we do our policymaking stuff in that way? So sometimes if you observe city council meetings, and I remember this during the year that I tried to go to every one, although there were a few that I missed, of, okay, wait, why is this happening right now? Like, why didn't this person know about that? Sometimes it's because people are hearing about something for the first time at the council meeting. If it comes up as a late agenda item, or if it comes up in a council report, it's not like the city council members have been able to let each other know ahead of time, hey, this is what I'm thinking about this, or, you know, oh yeah, this is in the packet, but I'm going to disagree with it. You know, we can't actually do that. So we're doing it in an open forum, and sometimes it seems a little awkward, but it's, I think, important for that to happen. So the relationship with other council members then becomes kind of a one-on-one thing. And if another council member calls me up and says, hey, let's get together about this, I like to get together. Although, you know, if 2 other council members say they want to get together about something, you know, sure, I could meet with you, but then if a 4th person says, hey, can we talk about item X on the agenda, I have to think, wait, how many other people have I talked to about that? Sorry, I can't do that, because then we go into a serial meeting. So there are these nuanced challenges with it there. Another thing, and so then with the city staff, you don't have the Open Public Meetings Act issues with the city staff because they're not the elected officials. It's not the body that can actually make the decision. So what I do, I meet with the city manager after the city council meetings, not that evening, but the next day. And we discuss what happened, and then we discuss some of the ideas that we have going forward. I raise concerns that I've heard from people in the public. We figure out, okay, what's the best way to try and work on those issues. So that's kind of the direct connection with the city manager. We're in email communication a lot. And with emails, it's trying to keep the appropriate city staff looped in on feedback. If I hear something from a member of the public, an example, the fireworks ordinance worked really well on 4th of July. It didn't work so well on New Year's Eve. That's feedback that then I can give to the appropriate staff members. So an aspect of being a city council member is being a conduit for people to reach to because, hey, I'm your representative. Does that necessarily mean that I'm the one who knows, how to get a reader board out that reminds people on New Year's Eve that there's no fireworks in Port Angeles? It's not, but I know who to contact to try to make that happen. Another issue around it, as I mentioned earlier, is for the city council, our only employee is the city manager. So we don't direct other city staff on what they do. The only person who we can tell what to do is the city manager, and technically, we can only direct the city manager when a majority of us make a decision at an open meeting, at a public meeting. So, even if I think something's a good idea, I can give feedback to the staff members, but I don't give direction to the staff members. And that's important for the organizational structure of the city, because really the city manager is in charge of executing the policies of the city. It's kind of like the governor of the state is in charge of all the different state agencies, Department of Commerce, Department of Revenue, those sorts of things. So trying to meet with key staff and understand, okay, what are their priorities? What are their skill sets? I'm trying to learn that because a lot of the city staff members have an amazing skill set. And we need to know, as council people, when we're thinking about policy, who are the people who we should tap for understanding how a certain area of policy works or could work better. Yeah.
So how was the relationship between the new staff and the senior staff? Or no, I'm sorry, not the staff, but the council.
Yeah, so there's 3 senior council members. It's Mayor Brook, Councilmember Kidd, and Councilmember Meredith. And we didn't have as much interaction as new people with them during the campaign. Certainly interacted with them. At this point, because Sissy Brook is the mayor, she plays a more pivotal role in kind of directing the council. I mean, she's the leader of the council, just like the city manager is the leader of the city staff. And so she's probably the one that I interact with the most because of that structural role as the mayor. But then with both of the other council members, I mean, I think we meet when we need to. We talk about things, and at this point, I think it's, it'll be maybe another month or so, and then it's like, okay, we're all on the council, and the fact that somebody's been on the council longer or shorter is going to make perhaps less of a difference as we go into it.
Okay. You've touched kind of on a little hot button, not specifically towards Councilmember Brook, but on the election of the deputy mayor. So there was a lot of talk that Councilmember Dexter was elected deputy mayor when it's been traditional that the senior council, one of the remaining council members typically ends up getting elected deputy mayor. And it's been noted that Councilmember Meredith was seeking to have that position. So can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so what was I thinking with that one? Yeah, what happened with that vote was we'd voted on mayor, and the majority of the council said they wanted Mayor Brooke. And then there were two nominations for deputy mayor. It was Councilmember Meredith and Councilmember Dexter. And it ended up being a 5-2 vote in favor of Councilmember Dexter. So yeah, people had said, well, traditionally, the senior council members are the mayor and deputy mayor. What happened for me is, I think there are some fractions on the council, excuse me, within kind of existing council members, and I felt like it was important for not everyone to get exactly what they wanted. So, Mayor Brooke, I think, who nominated Mayor Brooke? I think it might have been Councilmember Meredith, and then Councilmember Brooke, well now Mayor Brooke, nominated Councilmember Meredith. And so for me it was kind of like, I think it's important that, if there are different fractions in the council, that, the two key positions are not, the same fraction holding them. So that played a role for me. I also, Councilmember Meredith has indicated he might not continue on the council after this term. He's not sure yet, just to be clear. But Councilmember Dexter is new and has a lot of background in public administration, and I felt like she, the training as deputy mayor would be valuable for her coming in and having more time on the council. Whereas, it's nice to have an experienced person as deputy mayor, and Councilmember Meredith would fill that. This might be near the end of his council term, and so, can we use the deputy mayor position to help build the skill set of the council? Those are some of the things going to me. I don't know what the factors were for other council members. Yeah, both of them I thought would have been qualified. People sometimes say Councilmember Meredith doesn't say a lot on council. I have to say though that when he does speak, it's very influential, and we've seen that in a number of council meetings. And sitting down one-on-one with him, he totally had my confidence as a deputy mayor candidate. So for me, it was a really close call, and I wasn't totally sure. Even sitting down at that meeting, once I knew, wait a second, both of them want to be deputy mayor, I wasn't quite sure who I wanted to vote for, even at the beginning of the meeting.
So have you noticed that there was any friction or challenges as of that vote? Because it's been mentioned by a few people that there seems to be a little bit more, I don't want to say aggression, but just the tone of, especially over the last couple of council meetings in the plastic bag ordinance, where there's been a lot of extring and almost an anger-like presentation, especially out of Councilmember Meredith.
I don't know. I'm going to let people come to their own conclusions. I don't have any information that's really going to help, and speculating about what other people are thinking or if other people are, holding a grudge or something, like I'm not going to do.
So you haven't noticed anything that could be attributed to the fact that not that he didn't get his way, but that he wasn't elected as deputy mayor?
I mean, for me, in looking at the comments that people have made in the plastic bag ordinance, we've got 5 council members who understand the role of government to be protecting the public good, and we have 2 council members who are kind of saying, well, how dare we tell businesses what to do? And those are very different positions to come at what government does and what government is for. And I tend to believe that government exists to protect people's rights, to protect people's health, safety, and welfare. And on the balance with the plastic bag ordinance, I think it does protect people's health primarily through an environmental benefit. It also does some things, I think, financially for the city that's beneficial for the utilities, and does beneficial things economically through the aesthetics of our community, and through people's perception that this is a cleaner place. So I think it has benefits overall. I also understand what people are saying about, hey, shouldn't I be able to have the freedom of choice when I go to the grocery store? Or, what about this issue about, people not cleaning their reusable bags, and, then they've got cat hair or dog hair on them when they put them on the counter. Those sorts of things. Like, I'm listening to that and I'm taking that into consideration as I think about how we could change it. But fundamentally, if I was sitting next to somebody who said, well, we never regulate our businesses, we would never tell businesses what to do. I mean, I kind of was a little bit over the top when I said, with all due respect, that's precisely what government does, because sometimes businesses don't have the people's best interests in mind. Sometimes it's necessary for government to say, to protect the people's health, safety, and welfare, we're going to regulate you in this way. I use the example of inspecting restaurants, right? That's a pretty severe invasion on the part of government to go into somebody's business and look at what they're doing in, minuscule detail, like what's the temperature of the fridge and all that. Do we think it's worth it? Yes, because of the health benefits of those inspections. But to say that government doesn't do that and we shouldn't do that is to miss what government does. And so I think, I understand if Councilmember Meredith was, somewhat harsh in his response, I understand it because I was as well. And it's a fundamental question about what the purpose of government is. Is it for the public good or is it for the private good? And I think government is there to serve the public good through protecting people's rights, health, safety, and welfare.
Okay. I actually had a couple of thoughts while that was going on, and so they're kind of eluding me at the moment, but they were good follow-ups. One of them, it was noted that, especially with the plastic bag ban ordinance, there is a perception. So the city council is supposed to represent the population, right? But it's been noted by a few people over the course of council meetings that it seems like the council more or less already has their mind made up versus they are there and listening to the public. How do you address that?
Yeah, so I said earlier, we come in with particular biases, with particular perceptions. And, if you pick up an issue of public importance, most of us already have an opinion about it. We didn't come into council as blank slates, ready to kind of judge things objectively. And, even when you think of judges and what they do, judges have their own opinions and biases as well. And that's something that we've acknowledged in the law for, over 100 years now, with the whole idea of legal realism, recognizing that people have biases and people aren't really objective. So, with the council, there was some organizing by a community group at the end of last year, and several members of the council said, I'd like to get this done before the end of the year. The council took a vote to do that when those kids were in the room. It was some kids who had spoken at public comment. And then the kids left, council took a break, and they came back, and several council members said, actually, we don't think we should do this now, and let's table it. So I felt like listening to that tape, because I had to leave that meeting before it was over. Listening to that tape, I was a little shocked, because the council said one thing when the people were in the room, and then said something completely different after the people had left the room. And to me, that's not, we shouldn't say what you want to hear when you're there and then turn around and do the opposite when you're not there. So That left a bad taste in my mouth around, how was the council going to treat that issue? We do have a new council now, and I think the majority of people on the council say this is an issue that we should do. We've looked at other municipalities, even other states. The entire state of California have taken on this issue and said that overall this is a public benefit, and the incentivizing reusable bags ultimately is a positive thing for the community. So we're willing to take up this issue. And in February, we were asked whether to take up the issue, and we said yes. Let's take it up. Let's see what an ordinance looks like. Last week, we had our first hearing of the ordinance. With an ordinance, we have a first hearing and then a second hearing. At the second hearing, we can vote to enact the ordinance. Between the first hearing and now, just a few days later, 5 days later, there's some issues as I've kind of gone into the ordinance more deeply. There's some issues with it. There's a loophole in it that we need to close. There's some rewrites that are needed. So I have some opinions about how to change the ordinance, and we could get to the city council meeting next Tuesday or 2 Tuesdays from now. And if those aren't fixed, I could see myself saying we need to table this because the current ordinance on the table doesn't actually meet the goals that it's intended for and hasn't adequately addressed the concerns that other people in the community have raised, right? And I know that a number of people who probably voted for me would be, wait, why are you holding up the process? But for me, I think it's more important that the process goes forward and is done right rather than being pushed through and ending up with an ordinance that isn't the right policy for the city.
So to follow up on that, there are two things that I'm going to say. They're both kind of within that. So the first thing is you yourself have been quoted as saying that this process was deliberately made to be slower, so that it can be thought of and done with some thought. I'm not quoting exactly, obviously,
yeah,
because I'm trying to reach to the back of my head when I heard you, but it was during a council meeting, I believe, that you made that point. There is perception that some of these items should take more than 2 readings, and not even just so other people can come and comment on it, but just so that it does slow down, because there's people saying that all these items, 2 meetings, is not enough time, especially given the fact that you can't meet outside of public meeting easily to discuss, and it doesn't create for good flow of information amongst the council members.
Yeah.
So there's that. And the second part of that is, it's been also noted by myself, and I've said this to you before, that the council should not necessarily take the, maybe I'm phrasing it incorrectly, but take the concerns of kids, because 1, they're not taxpayers yet. 2, it is used as a ploy to create emotional reaction to the council, which kind of puts them on a spot and almost an obligation to bring forth concerns that may not be true community concerns.
Yeah. So on the kids issue, kids are going to be here a lot longer than those of us who are older than them in an actuarial perspective. And so, I do think that even though if kids aren't voters, even if kids aren't taxpayers, even if kids technically are owned by their parents, I think it's important to respect their opinions and think about what they see as issues in our community. Is it possible that kids get their opinions from their parents? Absolutely. And this is one issue where, okay, I'm sure there's some influence by the parents as to, this being an important issue. At the same time, I've heard a number of examples where when kids study this issue, they really take concern for the amount of plastics in the ocean. And they really see, wow, this is, we're killing our oceans with plastic. People say, well, plastic breaks down. Or plastic degrades, it goes away. You see that with old plastic bags. They've broken into all these different pieces. What happens is they've broken into all these different pieces. Those pieces eventually get small enough to be the size of phytoplankton and zooplankton. The zooplankton then start to eat it. It accumulates in their body. It's got some bioaccumulative toxic effects that then, as the zooplankton are eaten by larger animals and larger animals and larger animals up the food chain, those toxins bioaccumulate and it causes negative effects for marine life. We then eat, we love wild-caught salmon, but the wild-caught salmon are pretty high on the food chain and they've got a lot of bioaccumulative toxins in them. The fish consumption rate for Washington, that's been a debate recently, but according to how much you should eat based on the amount of toxins in fish, we're talking about like a couple tablespoons of salmon a month is like how much you should eat because of the amount of toxins in it. So we need to do something about that. That's an issue. I think wild-caught salmon is something that is one of the reasons why people live here. It's iconic for our region. It's iconic for the Northwest. And if people...
Do you think that focusing specifically towards the children, do you think that that is something that's used more so as a ploy by maybe the parents as a way to bring this forth that otherwise they wouldn't themselves bring it out to, versus a true concern of 6, 7, 8-year-old kids?
We've seen a lot of adults raise this issue as well. And yeah, so you could say, okay, did these kids get this idea because of their parents? You can totally make that argument. So I'm not going to disagree with you about that because, I don't know in this particular instance, but I think I can probably convince this middle school kid of a number of things, some of which might be true, some of which might not, right, if I really wanted to. That said, I could probably convince some adults of things that aren't true too, So I'm not sure that it makes that much of a difference there. So yeah, I understand the issue, and it's important for the council to say, okay, yeah, who's talking to us about this? And at the same time, what are the merits of the arguments? Are the arguments, superlative factoids? Okay, well, that's one thing. Is there a larger policy reason for this that maybe isn't coming across in things that kids are saying? Certainly, that's the case. And I think it's important for kids to speak their minds and, to recognize that, they can have opinions and they can be loud about that. And does that mean that we're making the decision because it was kids saying it? No. Does it mean that those kids' voices played a role? Potentially. And also I think it goes to this idea that the political process is always this rational process. That's what we got rid of with the ideas of people like Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, who said the life of the law is not logic, it is experience. What is the law is usually what is convenient for people in positions of power. And policy making is the same way. I believe in the models of community organizing that say, if you want to get something done, make it easier for the elected officials to do what you want to do rather than do the opposite. And that comes in a lot of forms. Saying no to kids is not easy, right? And so that's a form of pressure politics. But what I've told people, and I've said this in the public meetings, that I said, whether you agree with the direction the council is taking on this issue or disagree, this community group that's raised this issue has done it in a way that is effective. So those steps are: create an issue, make it a public issue. 2, organize around it, right? Get policy forward before the policy-making body, and then keep putting the pressure on until they do what you want to see. That's a model that works no matter what your issue are, no matter whether you're on the right or on the left. It's pressure politics, and that's how community organizing has worked since the days of Saul Alinsky. So, that's something that it's no secret. I think that's why the bridges worked in terms of public policy, because we had people standing up and demanding change. We had people storming out of city council meetings. Is that necessarily what you should do? No, I'm not saying that. It's better to be civil about it, But at the same time, if your elected officials aren't listening to you, you need to make them listen. And that's been the story of community organizing for decades, if not centuries. And to say, well, it shouldn't be that way, I think is to deny human nature and to deny the human elements of government.
So you brought up sides, the right and the left. It's also been noted that, one of the reasons why I ran was to have a little bit of a difference on the council as well. But it's been noted by other people, which one of them, and I won't say who it is, but was part of the Progressive Coalition group. And this person told me, this council really doesn't represent the city. And me, coming from the Progressive Coalition, I can see that and say, that the majority of the council does not represent a balanced citizenship in our community, that it's skewed towards one side versus neutral or the other. What do you say about that?
I mean, I'm still learning out all the council members' political nuances. There's some things that a majority of the council say that I agree with. There's other things that I might not agree with. Part of it too is, if that's the case, I think part of it is the nuances of how we elect the council. And this is something I was thinking about as we went through this last campaign. So we had a pretty exciting political campaign in 2017 where we had 10 people sign up to run for 4 seats. 3 people were running for the first seat, 3 people for the second, 2 for the third, 2 for the fourth. So that meant that voters were basically fixed in these choices. Who do I want for position 1, A, B, or C? Who do I want for position 2, D, E, or F, right? But what if I like both D and E? Sorry, you have to pick one of those for this position, one of those for this position. And then in the seat we ran for and seat 4, there were just 2 choices. I mean, what if people didn't like either of us, but liked both Travis Berglund and Kate Dexter? Well, sorry, you have to choose between Berglund and Dexter, and you have to choose between Wojnowski and Schromen-Wawrin, right? You don't get to say, there's 10 candidates, who are my favorite? And so I think we could do it in a better way. This might require changes in the state law, but what I'd like to see more is say, okay, you want to run for city council? You don't choose position 1, 2, 3, or 4, or in 2019, you don't choose 5, 6, or 7. You choose city council, and then we put everybody's names in who's filed, and we say, rank them. Choose your favorite, second favorite, third favorite, fourth favorite, ranked choice vote, and then you can, sorry, I've got a clogged nose, recovering from a cold. And then basically we can say, okay, well, who got the most votes, and put those people up. You could do a more sophisticated ranked choice voting method where you take people's votes for the least popular candidates and they get their second choice to count if their first choice didn't count, that sort of thing. And that would tend to represent more of the diversity of Port Angeles. Again, based on the candidate pool, we're only working with that candidate pool. But I think that would provide more for, if we look at the political spectrum as simply, right to left or left to right, that would provide for more diversity along that spectrum. Because within that simple model, when we say, okay, whoever the majority supports, I think at the national level, we end up seeing people moving toward the center with the assumption that there's kind of a population bell curve there. And so the candidates sometimes end up being as close as possible because they're just trying to capture their side. But at the local level, we can get a similar thing where in each position, you're only choosing between one or the other candidate. So it's not necessarily going to represent the diversity of perspectives in our city. And I should say, I don't think that the left-right is enough of a complexity for political analysis, but it's often what we talk with.
Let's take a quick break here. What's going on?
Good idea.
You like it?
Yep.
Cool.
I do. As a matter of fact, I know some people that would be real receptive to that idea.
Cool.
I gotta run, guys.
Okay.
I'll lock the door. Jonathan's here.
Oh, okay.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, you want me to put that over there for you?
Oh, yeah, either way, sorry.
Turn that back on. I didn't know if you was gonna hang out and
No, yeah.
try and discuss.
So I guess the other answer to that too is, this is the council that the city of Port Angeles elected. So if somebody's saying, well, maybe this council doesn't represent the people, well, within our system of representative government as is, these are the representatives of the people. But I also agree with the perspective that the way we do the election doesn't necessarily get the diversity of perspectives that we ought to have when we're talking about representative government.
So do you think it's going to be a challenge to represent the population evenly? You did mention before that everyone comes in with a bias, and not through any fault of council, this is the makeup that we have of council. Do you think it's going to be a challenge to represent the population equally?
I mean, when I campaigned, I knocked on people's doors no matter what political insignia they had in their front yard. If they had a dog, sometimes I didn't go in the fence because there were some issues there with just, the dog was barking at me, I'm not going in the fence. But I didn't care if they had a Trump sign or a Bernie sign or, like what they were saying. And I intentionally made that decision because I'm not just going to reach out to people who have similar views to me. When I went door to door, I went on my list and I said, okay, I'm going to knock on this door, even if the political insignia on the house tells me that this isn't somebody who I'm going to agree with on a lot of issues politically. I still think it's important to hear their perspectives. And some of those discussions were really informative for me. We just took a break because somebody else came in, but we had talked about one of those, and that had been an inspiring conversation for him as well when I told him that story. And so, I don't have a problem hearing from people who I disagree with. And I made the decision when we were putting together our business cards for the city. Typically, the city council business cards have the city manager's office phone number on them. So they have our own email address, but they have the city manager's office phone. I said, no, I want my own phone number on there because I want people to be able to hear from me directly or be able to contact me directly. So that is my phone number on my business card, and you can call me. And if I'm not available, leave a message, let me know what's going on. If you want me to call me back, let me know and I'll make an effort to do that. But don't hesitate to call me and say, hey, this is what I'm thinking. And if we can have a respectful dialogue about that, the last phone call I took from somebody who was concerned about the plastic bag ordinance, they made me think about some issues that weren't considered in the ordinance, and I'm suggesting now to the city attorney that we include those in there so that that person's concerns can be addressed to some extent.
So if you could change one thing right now, and you only have one thing to change, what would it be?
Well, the thing I'm working on right now, I put this together 2 mornings ago, and I've started circulating it, asking for people's opinions about it, is finding a short-term solution to the housing shortage. So, we think of the housing problem, okay, we lack affordable housing. We have very low vacancy rate, which means the prices are up. The side effect of having unaffordable housing is having more homelessness. That has a lot of trickle-out effects in different ways, whether it's panhandling downtown or people living in the creek valleys or issues around there's so many trickle-out issues. But affordable housing and homelessness are intertwined, right? So how do we address affordable housing? The Department of Commerce at the state has done some analysis on it. And their conclusion is, at least this go around for the housing shortage and the housing prices, is that it's about actually a shortage of housing, that there are not enough smaller units of housing for the population demand in Washington state generally, in places like Port Angeles specifically, and thus we have a very low vacancy rate. The ideal rental vacancy rate is about 6%. in Port Angeles right now, it's less than 2%. So it's very hard for people to find housing. I actually saw an email the other day where some people were looking to rent a house. They were offering $100 finder's fee. I mean, basically, like, if you find me this place and we sign a contract, we'll give you $100. I'd never seen a finder's fee for a rental before in somebody searching for rentals. So, I mean, it's tight out there, and you see people's behavior change this way. So, okay, the solution is build more housing. Okay, but it takes a long time. I mean, you're a contractor, you know, like, how long it takes to actually build a unit from planning to finishing it and people move in. So building more housing isn't a short-term solution, it's a medium or long-term solution. We're talking about years time frame, not let's get this in a couple of months. So we had a conversation, and I had that similar conversation with a few other people about, well, what about all these structures that are in our community, these shelters that people aren't living in? What about the RV parked in somebody's yard? What about the camper trailer in the back of their lot? These are structures, and you can put a portable heater in there, electric, and warm them up. They can be habitable. They can be connected to water. They could be connected into the side sewer that's already running through your backyard. It would cost maybe $500 to put an additional clean out in the side sewer, and you could connect it right in. And these are already structures that are in our urban space. So if people are concerned about the aesthetics of the community, it's like, well, my neighbor has a big RV sitting there in his yard already. It's not going to change anything if somebody's living in it. Actually, it might be slightly better. And so we've got the shelters. What if we could live in these? So currently, the law for the city is that you're not allowed to have a residence as a trailer, a boat, an RV, all this. There's a few exceptions. One is the boat haven, one is designated trailer parks, one is temporary use permits. The temporary use permit structure is more around like during construction. So what I put together a few days ago was a draft ordinance for a temporary use permit during housing shortages, so that people could get a temporary use permit. It would be good for a year when the vacancy rate is less than 6%. So when we have a housing shortage, the city can say temporary use permit to have somebody live in that trailer or that mobile home or RV. And that would then allow for these structures, many of which are already here, to be used as housing. And if people aren't finding housing, where are they currently living? They're living in their cars. I'd rather see somebody living in a camper trailer than living in a car. Would it be better if they had an actual house? Sure, but that's the medium-term or long-term solution. Right now we need short-term solutions because your option is your car, an emergency shelter, or camping in a creek valley somewhere. So I'd rather that people are living legitimately, and there's a lot of psychological security that comes with knowing that, okay, I'm living in this trailer on the back of somebody's lot, and it's legal, right? As opposed to, oh, it's illegal. I'm sure people are doing this now to some extent, and I could get kicked out at any point. I don't have tenant rights. There's all sorts of issues that come with that being an illegal residency. So I think it would be beneficial for us as a community because it would quickly create a lot more housing units. It's designed to take effect during housing shortages, and then if the vacancy rate gets above 6%, then those temporary use permits wouldn't be eligible for renewal. So, but at that point, I mean, we're talking about between 2% and 6% right now. And so it gives us a quick way to get a lot of additional housing, which hopefully will help to get people out of their cars or out of their, or off the streets into places where they can have more security. And we know from some of the theory about how to help homeless people get back as productive members of society is that one of the leading models now is called housing first. From the housing first perspective, you get somebody in a house, you get them in a stable dwelling unit, and then they're able to more readily get to mental health treatments. They're more readily able to get to their substance abuse treatments. They're able to find a job more easily because they actually have an address that they can put on their application, and they're able to take a shower before they go in to ask about an application and whether there's an opening for that dishwasher job at the restaurant. So housing first is the way to go with ending homelessness, but that means that there has to be housing. I talked to people at the Housing Resource Center that Serenity House runs, and they can provide vouchers for people to get into housing, but there's just no housing for them to get to. So the issue is we need more housing. How can we get that fast while we have a pretty extreme housing shortage? And I think this ordinance is something that could help us get there. So that's what I was working on, just not based on prerogative from anyone telling me this is an agenda item now, but that's what I threw out this week, and I look forward to talking to more people about it. My intention is to share it around, get feedback, see if this changes, so that we can do it more, perhaps like the fire department did the Medic 1 utility rate increase, where people know it's coming, people have thought through the issues, it's not going to be a surprise for anyone, whether it's city staff, whether it's city council members, whether it's members of the public. And we'll see. I mean, maybe somebody comes up with a reason why this is a really bad idea, and I'll take that into consideration. Maybe we need to scrap it. But so far, I haven't heard that, although I haven't talked to more than half a dozen people about it, because it's kind of fresh out of the word processor.
So I know you mentioned that you and I were the ones who talked about that. So does that mean I get the credit for your information on this?
If you'd like to take the credit for it, I will certainly give you the credit.
I'm kidding,
yeah.
I'm kidding.
No, the credit might also be the that's a horrible idea. I can't believe you're thinking.
Sure, why not?
But it's the sort of thing too that for people who are thinking about this, and you mentioned that you were thinking about this idea as a solution to housing issues and doing it personally. It's the sort of thing that I really want your feedback, because you're going to think through the details of, well, is this provision about connections to electricity, water, and side sewer, does that actually meet the needs of the property owner thinking about putting some of these units in and being able to rent them out? Does this actually work from a practical perspective? That's a question for you as somebody who might do this. That's a question for the city planning department, who has to look at this ordinance if it becomes law and say, how do we actually implement this? Should I include a provision about how much the permit fee should be? I'm not sure. I still need to talk to the planning department about that detail. But I mean, this is the process that we go through as a legislative branch of government. The city council is supposed to make the policy. And part of the reason why I was interested in city council was because I have ideas about how to actually draft policy. And I look forward to being involved in that process, which is very collaborative. It's, as we talked about before, it's the relationships, who's going to be involved at the city level, who's involved within the city, and can we come up with policy that people are going to say, yeah, this is something that I want to support and I see the benefits of. There might be a few problems, but let's tweak the policy to make them work.
So what are your career ambitions? You're currently a lawyer, and we know you've just been elected city council. What's the future for you?
I just want to, garden in my backyard. I mentioned before I went to law school because I wanted to understand how the system works in order to try and make it better, to improve conditions for our economy, for society, for the environment. And that's something that I'd be interested in pursuing. I would consider continuing in the political. I mean, I like the combination of private practice law plus politics, so I appreciate the city council not requiring me to tell my clients, sorry, I have a full-time job, as a policymaker now. So, that said, I would consider kind of looking at other political paths. One of the things is you get into this realm where more and more about whether you're in an elected office becomes about whether you can raise a lot of money, and I'm really not interested in that issue, because you become beholden to the people who donate to you, and they come to have expectations. And I think particularly at the federal level with Congress, I mean, they're expected to raise about $1,000 a day on average to be able to run campaigns at that level. I have no interest in that. I mean, I tell groups when, people ask for donations, and for some reason when we're on city council, we end up on even more organizations' donation lists. And it's like, wait, you realize I'm volunteering even more of my time than I already did, and now you want me to donate money as well? So I mean, I donate my time in terms of the skills I have as an attorney, and that means I don't have as much money to donate because I'm not working at standard attorney rates for the most part. But I consider looking at policy at the state level beyond just local stuff. But right now I'm really excited about learning about how the city works, working with my existing clients on the legal work that they need my help with, and seeing what we can do within Port Angeles. Port Angeles, though, is in its own bubble, and that's why it's like, we end up working at the state level. One thing I didn't expect when I was on city council was how much we're asked to interface with our state representatives and with the legislative process in Olympia. That a big part of what the Association of Washington Cities does, which the city of Port Angeles is a member of, is lobby for certain bills or against certain bills in the state legislature. So I went down with a couple other council members and the city manager, and we lobbied our state representatives around funding for the 8th Street bridges, because we wanted them to understand the importance of trying to put that $350,000 into the state capital budget, even though it was pretty late for that state capital budget process. So, I mean, part of being a city council member is actually lobbying your state representatives, and I didn't really expect that when I signed up. That was probably naive. I should have expected that, but there's been surprises.
So I'm going to wrap it up with giving you up to 5 minutes to basically kind of what we went over here, but to let you say it in your own words without any question or anything. How would you summarize our intent here, which is to tell the people who you are, what you're going to do for them, and what your plan is. And you can take some time to think about that if you want. Like I said, I can give you up to 5 minutes, so that way, worst case scenario, if I don't like the editing that I've done, I can just say, here's Lindsey's 5 minutes of who he is, his perspective, and his plans.
All right.
So you can take time to think about it, or you can go off whenever you want. Just let me know.
All right. We'll just pretend like we haven't just been talking for 2 hours.
There you go.
So here we go. I'm Lindsey Schromen-Wawrin, and I'm on the Port Angeles City Council as of January 2018. The City Council is the legislative branch of the city government. So it makes the policies for the city. That means making laws that go into the Port Angeles Municipal Code. Those are ordinances. It also means setting policy direction, like what's the level of service we provide for the electric utility or the water utility or roads or police department response and fire department response. Those are all decisions that the city council makes. So I'm one member of a 7-member city council, and I look at my role as representing the people of Port Angeles and the things that are going to make this place a better place for people to live. I think of it in an inclusive way. I think our community should be all of us, and that we should look at it as, how do we make this place work for everyone who's here? And how do we make it work affordably? Because we need to recognize median income in this community is in the $40,000 range. We're not an affluent community, even though there are some people who are fairly affluent here. But how do we make this place work for people who are just trying to get by? So those are some of the things I'm interested in. So I serve on the the city's utility advisory committee, which looks at the cost of service for the utilities. I'm on the Clallam Transit Board, which runs the buses, which provides transit, and how can we make that transit more accessible, more available, more closer to the convenience that we have when we hop into our car, rather than the inconvenience that you have when you look at the bus schedule and say, I have to wait at this bus stop for half an hour. So those are the sort of things we're looking at there. I'm on the Puget Sound Partnerships Ecosystem Restoration Network, which is looking at the what can be done to improve or restore the ecological function of our community. And that leads to things like better fish harvest ultimately, more habitat for species, and that sort of thing. I'm also on the regional, let me get the acronym right, the Peninsula Regional Transportation Planning Organization, which meets in Shelton because it's Kitsap County, Kitsap County, Mason County, Clallam County, Jefferson County. And that looks at regional transportation issues for the whole Olympic Peninsula. So those are my specific committee assignments as a council member. So I do that in addition to the council meetings. But I didn't mean to get so long-winded there. The gist of it is I'm involved in some of the things that have to do with how we keep this place affordable and sustainable in the long run, with managing infrastructure like transportation and utilities. And with that thought in mind, one of the key things I want to work on is affordable housing and making sure that this is a place where people can find the housing they need, where they're not pushed into homelessness and all the health and safety issues that come with that, and also all the issues that come for us as a community when people are homeless in our community. So I think of my role as representing the people. I think I said that already. And that means that I do need to hear from people about what issues are pressing. People have said, hey, congratulations on your election. And my response to that is, and now lobby me. Tell me what you want to see in this city, and I will try to use the skills I have as a policy writer, as a policy maker, as an attorney, to try to make those happen within this organization that we call the City of Port Angeles. So I say that wanting to hear from people because I see my accountability going down to the people, not up to the other council members or the city manager. Who am I accountable to? It needs to be the people of Port Angeles. But the people need to hold me accountable as an elected official, because more and more as an elected official, the people you talk to on a day in and day out basis are the city staff and are the other council members. And that's important because we're the ones actually implementing these policies. But if we don't have contact with people who are living the life of, hey, my utility bill went up more than I can handle, or why couldn't I get a heat pump on my house to keep my winter heating bills down, then we're out of touch. So get in touch with us and let us know what is it that we need to be doing to make this place work better for you. Thanks.
Okay. Very good. All right.
All right.
So it's locked, so I gotta, look at that, there's sparks between us.
Oh, so sweet.